Hello everyone, it is time for this week's live stream. So we have an ongoing series on this channel where we talk about the 400-gallon build, and this is part 5. So if you haven't been following along, this is a good time to go to the beginning. Just so you know, the first 35 to 45 minutes or so is the actual build, and then we go into the question and answer section at the end of the video where I answer your questions live on camera and try to help you out with your aquariums. So, we are getting there. Here's my final shirt of the year. I haven't decided if I'm going to rerun a couple more just to wrap up the year, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to just wear these Hawaiian shirts each weekend, and I've been doing that, and it's fun. Elmer, you were first. You did a great job. Welcome. Hi, Pop Reef. Hey, Michael. Hey, Anmar. Paul's here. Baker's Reef is here. Santana's Reef. All the reefs are here. Look at that. 1, 2, 3. That's funny. There's like 5 of them right off the bat. Let's see. Do we have any news? I guess we could start off with this one. This one's kind of important. Let's see. Where'd you go? Coral Magazine. It's about to go to press. It goes to press on Tuesday. Oh, I'm so tired. And then it'll take, 2 weeks or so to arrive in your mailbox. So if you are not a subscriber, you should subscribe today. Get your submission. Matter of fact, buy yourself a Christmas present and feed Matt Peterson's children. That's what he always says. Buy yourself a subscription for 2024 and get 6 issues next year for $39. It comes straight to your mailbox. If you're international, it costs more, maybe $69 because of the shipping internationally. But you should buy it right now. You should just say, instead of a frag, I'm going to buy Coral Magazine and get myself a ton of knowledge. I mean, if you get 6 issues, you are looking at getting something like 12,000 hours of expertise, because we are estimating we have about 2,000 hours of work that goes into every issue. So I want you to get a magazine, and if you subscribe now, like today, you'll get included for this issue that's going to press. If you wait a few days, if you hold off, you won't get it till March, April. So that's a long wait. And why should you miss it? So I would highly recommend you order this. This is the new cover. We are talking about pincer fish. What the heck is that? And I hope that you guys really enjoy it. We've got some incredible features in this issue. And man, it is like going to college building these magazines for you guys. I have to fact check and verify every single thing, and it's exhausting. But it's a labor of love, and so I really hope you guys will appreciate it and subscribe. My goal is to get everyone in the United States to subscribe, so don't expect me to stop talking about it. I also should mention, right here at the get-go, I do need to also pay the bills, and while I am getting paid from Coral, I need to keep running Milo's Reef. So if you would please be so kind as to shop at Milo's Reef, it's literally shop.milosreef.com, and buy products that can help you with your aquarium. I sell the things I use myself. I have been running this online business as it was my sole source of income until 2 months ago, but it is my main source of income. It literally is what pays the bills. And so every time you buy something, you're helping me keep going. So I do appreciate your support. Please do go there. And then lastly, I'm going to remind you guys here at the beginning of the show to come join us at Club Milo's Reef. We have a group on Facebook, and we have about 9,300 members in there. Super nice people, no judgmental people, no angry trolls. We've actually created this group specifically to be nice. Just like this channel. We have a nice channel. And so I want you guys to feel included. I love to see your tanks. I love to see your inspiration. I like to see your questions. If we can help you in some way, we've got some fantastic people in there that are always looking to assist others. You don't have to be nervous or worried where you will not be made fun of, because you can ask your questions. So I just want you to feel safe about that. All right, let me go ahead. I notice I'm getting all kinds of notifications. Let me set this up to do not disturb, because these people are disturbing me right now. And we're going to get into our topic here. So let me switch gears. And here we are. So when we left off, we had done some concrete work. And I'm trying to think what else. Painted the walls, stuff like that. So we are moving forward. So part 5, we're going to be talking about the building of the sump. There's not a lot of detail in this section because at the time I was just building my sump. And so what you've got here is a table in my living room. Behind it is still the fish equipment with the temporary livestock in the background. So this room was pretty humid actually. And I don't think even at this time that I was running a dehumidifier, which is so important when you're gluing acrylic. If your environment is moist, what'll happen is the seams can turn white and you can't make the white go away. I mean, it literally becomes a characteristic of the sump, and you could try polishing and stuff like that, but it's why do that? So reduce the humidity. I was well known for keeping my house really cold. I remember my mother once said, "Does it have to be so cold in here?" And I just replied, "Absolutely." Instead of like, "I'm sorry, Mom, what can I do to make you more comfortable?" I was a terrible son. I feel bad. But keeping that humidity down in the house was more than just for the seams of acrylic work, but it was also to keep my walls from sweating, my vents from rusting. It was for the house. But yeah, she was cold, so she would go in her bedroom and close the door where it was warmer, and I felt kind of bad that she would do that. I was like, wow, what a host I am. So what you're looking at here is the sump is on its back panel, and this is how I build all my sumps. So you put the back panel on the table, then you put the end pieces on each side, and then you put in your internal baffles, and then you flip, after it's been cured, then you flip the entire thing over onto the front panel and you glue that together. And that's what I did here. So you've got it flipped over, and there is a piece of pink foam right there in the center of the sump that is keeping the top piece from sagging from the weight. This is all made out of 3/8 cast acrylic. I wanted a very nice strong sump. It's pretty big. It measures 58 inches long by 31.5 inches wide by 17 inches tall. So right now I'm basically just making the shell. And the reason that one baffle is kind of floating, it doesn't go all the way down to touch the front pane, is because the full length of the sump across the entire front was my refugium. So here it is on the table after I've gotten the whole form was built, and then it had to be glued to the bottom panel, which would then be the base, obviously. And you can see all those little shims under there. So I'm shimming underneath my bottom piece to lift it up, so that way where the wall of the sump is touching the base of the sump, I want to make sure that it's equalized all the way across. So I have pins every 6 inches. I've got a shim under every pin, and I'm trying to make sure that that bottom piece is, because the board, whatever surface you work on, rarely is perfectly true. It usually has some lows and highs. So using the shims is a good solution to make the adjustments. Something else that I've been doing forever, and you've seen in other parts but not in this picture because the sump was so big I couldn't do it. But normally I have a big piece of carpet underneath, and all those little carpet tendrils are pushing up to equalize everything out to get you a nice smooth surface. But even then, sometimes I still have to use shims and pins, and that's what I did there to make sure that my base was nice and secure. And I mean, we're talking about this in 2023. I built this in 2011. I think it was probably 2015, 2016 when I chose to replace the sump with a new one. So, I mean, I got 5 or 6 years out of that sump, and then eventually someone else got it and put it under their tank. So, what I did, it lasts a good long time. It's not something that you have to be worried about. I always overbuild things. I want to make them super strong. And in the case of this sump here, you're seeing it's still rough. It still needs the top piece put on with all of its opening. I do the opening a very specific way. And you don't see any refugium teeth at all in there. And you'll see why when we get to the pictures here a little bit further in the presentation. More plumbing parts arrived. Lots of T's and elbows. Some of these are 1.5 inches. Some of these are 1 inch. There's also some cap pieces. There's some of that Spaflex that's in black. Again, I was trying to keep all my plumbing black under the tank. And then whatever I didn't have or couldn't acquire, I ended up painting to make it match. So I would literally rough it up. I'd use Krylon Fusion for plastic. I would spray paint all those fittings black, and then I would go ahead and let them cure for about 24 hours, and then I'd go ahead and continue with the assembly. Now, when you've glued PVC parts, if you have to do that, I'm sorry, did I say that right? If you glue painted PVC parts, sometimes the solvents will melt the paint off and you might need to touch it up. Now, in the case of using black, if you just have little tiny areas where a little bit of white appeared, you can take a Sharpie and just color it, and that'll take care of the problem. You don't have to repaint again. Then back to the concrete work. Remember I told you I'd got it all level under the tank itself inside the metal frame. And then I also did the area where it comes out from under the metal frame to go to the French drain. But then I had an area toward the wall where water was still leaking and it was amassing near the wall behind the big poly tank. And I wanted to divert that. I wanted that to come back into the fish room and not go under the wall and into the garage. So I went ahead and I mixed up some more of the stuff. I made my concrete wet first so it would apply. And oh, actually, this is a different spot. But the poly tank also had the same treatment. I just don't have pictures of that. But what we're doing here, this is the part behind the door that leads into the hallway that goes into the living room. So I wanted to bring this part up again. Again, I poured water on the floor, saw where the water went, said, okay, this is where I need to raise it up. And I worked this stuff into the floor, filled it in, got it sloped slightly so it brings it back to where it needs to go into this drain that you can see in the picture that's dark gray with all the little holes. Then Home Depot has this shower pan liner, and I was able to buy this by the foot. I don't remember what it cost at the time, but I also had to buy this can of glue. And I remember the glue was like ridiculously expensive because I only needed like 4 or 6 daubs of it, and I had like 95% of the can left over. And odds are that can is still in my garage unless I gave it to somebody. So what I did was I laid the liner in the base of my steel stand, and I curled it up on the sides because I'm trying to make a pan, like a drip pan, to catch any fluid. But really, it's not to create a full vessel. I'm trying to make sure the water goes to one spot and one spot only, and that is into the floor drain that is a couple of feet to the, let's say, the left of the aquarium. So what I've got going on here, I've folded it up, I've trimmed it to the right height. I wanted to just be even with the metal. I didn't want it to stick up really tall. I have no reason for that. I just needed it to keep the walls from doing this, from flopping over. I wanted them to stand up nice and true. And once I had created my fold in the corner, I would use clamps to hold it in place. And once I knew it was right, I'd go ahead and apply the glue, which is the solvent. It's really a contact cement. It's a type of contact cement. And you would apply it to the 2 parts and let them kind of wait a few seconds and press them together and then clamp it, and then that's it. They're glued together and you have a nice tight corner, and then you can cut off all the excess trim and you have this really nice liner. The liner is a very inexpensive solution to keeping water from spreading into your living room or across the floor nearby. Now, the one thing, I remember I told you, I'm trying to divert it. I'm not trying to hold it. My goal was not to contain and hold up to 20 gallons of water in this thing. Because here's the thing. If you have a liner under your tank and you have all your equipment in there, and let's say you're using external pumps, like, for example, the Dart pumps were very popular for a very long time. Those are, and there's other ones, there's Pan World, there's Hammerhead. These are all different, the different pumps, they're not allowed to be in water. And if you have them standing in a pond liner and the liner fills up with water, the pump itself will be standing in water and water will get into the motor and it'll short it out and possibly trip the breaker. So you're trying to keep the water off the floor, but you're also trying not to short out your equipment. So when you have an external pump that cannot get wet, you want to make sure that your pond liner isn't so tall that it becomes a small swimming pool. That's the point I want to get across to you. So what I did with mine, I have the pond liner and it's all the way around, and then I cut an area it looks like about 3 feet long, and I folded it down so now the water, wherever it is under the tank itself, near the sump, near the top-off container, near the pumps, because they can leak, and they did occasionally, that water would then go to this spot and pour right out into the French drain. It was perfect. So what I'm doing is I'm corralling the water. I'm not trying to retain the water. And I just wanted you to understand that. If you ever have some kind of a leak under your tank, and let's say your sump splits a seam and water goes under the sump, you may be able to correct the problem, but because the water is under the sump, you may think it's still leaking. And what I'm trying to emphasize here is that if you have to repair, you need to remove the sump entirely and you need to dry everything off. and then dry off the bottom of the sump, mend the sump, repair it, let it cure, then put it back in place, and then fill it up with water. Because as long as there's a sheet of water under your sump, even though you fixed the problem, you might see water oozing out still for a long time because it takes forever for that to evaporate from out from under the sump. So if you were to clean it all up and dry it, if there's water, you know there's still a problem. But if you fixed it, but you still have the water there because you never got around to mopping it all up and getting it bone dry, then you might think or be worried that the sump is still leaking when in fact it's not. And you might be putting more and more glue thinking, I need to solve this, it's not good enough, I need to put more. And really it's just the water wicking out from under the sump that leaked a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I mean, it takes a while. So you really want to clean everything up. And this liner is the same liner that I put in back in 2011. That liner is still under my system to this day. And back in whenever I said 2015, 2016, when I replaced my sump, I took a sponge and some probably some vinegar and water. It's my normal thing. And I just cleaned it so it looked brand new again. Put my brand new sump in, put my brand new top-off container, put my brand new pump. And that was it. And you couldn't tell that it was 5-6 years old already. So you can definitely clean stuff up like this very easily compared to exposed wood that got swollen from water damage. Now, while I was working around the tank, being the ongoing, wannabe perfectionist that I am, I noticed that that area of the overflow box on the end of my tank, the silicone didn't go to the bottom. It was like this weird air gap. And I thought, that doesn't look good. I've got to do something to reinforce it. So I bought some more clear silicone. And I tried to squeeze it in the gap. And I didn't do a great job, but I kind of pushed some in there as a just in case. And it never leaked from that spot. So I did a good job. But we do know that after 13 months, this tank that I'm showcasing right now actually sprung a leak and had to be replaced. But then, I also climbed inside the tank because there was another area I wanted a silicone. So the part of the tank that has the plastic trim on the top, it's usually they put a piece of silicone, a bead of silicone inside it, and then they press it down on there and it's done. But when you're working in the tank, you're putting things on that Eurobrace rim, you're just setting things down, or you're working the tank and water's running off your arms and getting on there, it can actually get through the plastic and sometimes drip right down the front of your tank. So to avoid those drips, to avoid the unnecessary messiness that can happen from working in an aquarium, I used some more of that same silicone and I went between the glass and the plastic black trim and just worked that bead all the way around, the 7 feet, the 3 feet, and the 7 feet. And it actually took me 40 minutes to accomplish this job. And that silicone did a great job. I didn't have any unnecessary drips later on. Now my Euro bracing you're looking at there, it's double thick. It's that was 2 pieces of 1/2 inch glass that makes it 1 inch thick. And this is something you need to know because of the next part that's coming up. So there it is with my nice clean silicone bead. Here I'll do it without. No bead, with a bead, no bead, with a bead. It just worked. So, okay, then I needed a top-off container. And as I alluded to last week, I made it really big and it didn't have to be quite that big. So what you're looking at here on my workstation is I made a container that was 22 inches wide, 15.5 inches front to back deep, and 32 3/4 inches tall. I went for the maximum height that I could squeeze under my tank to hold the most amount of water so this could top off my aquarium for a solid 7 days. My assumption was that the tank was going to evaporate 6-7 gallons a day. This container could hold 45 gallons, so I felt like I was pretty close to having enough water for a solid week. And it's all made out of 3/8 cast acrylic again. And this is something I forgot about. I totally forgot about it until I went back to all my old notes from back in the day. I had applied, and this is this is an interesting factoid. I had forgotten that I had applied some reflective window film on the side of the top-off container that faced the sump. So it's silvery looking. If you look at it from one side, it looks like silver. You look from the other side, it's see-through. People sometimes put this film on the front of their storm door that faces outside. So people look toward the house, they see a reflection. But you can look out the storm door as if it was a window. So I put this I had this stuff. It was just sitting in my garage. I got it from somebody, they said, here, do you want this? I'm like, okay. And I just shoved it in there. I was like, I could use this mirror film on this thing, and that way any light from my refugium shining into the top-off container would be reflected back away, and I wouldn't get nuisance algae in my top-off container. And it did exactly what I expected. I mean, the top-off container was always clean inside. I had no problems. So if you have a situation where you might feel you're dealing with some kind of weird algae issue, perhaps you can do something like this film, and you just apply it with some soapy water, and then use a squeegee and you spread it out just like you would do window tint in a car, and that's it. Bob's your uncle. So I put it on there, and you can kind of see the reflection there. It looks like a mirror from one angle, and then from the other you can see through it. So that was intentional. I also made this container with a little sliding door at the top, which you can't really see yet, but you'll see it in a moment. And it was very hard to do because I had to build the door. This is when I was just coming up with crazy ideas and didn't really have the tools to do it. So I created a couple of rails inside the lid, and I made the door, and I put a handle on the door, and I had to put the door assembly together, flip it upside down, support it on wooden blocks, and then glue my box on top of that with the door permanently installed. So I could never, ever, ever remove the door because it's inside the container for life. But it allowed me to close it and keep it dust-free so that no TDS could ever get in there. I also added a float valve to this container because I never wanted to lift a bucket of water again. I was going to run the water from my RODI system straight through the ceiling and then through the walls into the fish room and to this container right here, and not into my sump. Some people like to put a float valve in their sump so that their RODI just turns on and off as needed as the tank evaporates water. And this is a super dangerous thing that I've actually written articles about and videos saying do not do this. So if you're one of those people that does that, I'm going to continue to encourage you to desist and to set up a top-off reservoir near your aquarium where you can limit the damage. So if you have a container of 15 or 20 gallons of water in a container next to your sump, worst case scenario, 15 gallons or 20 gallons of water could go into your sump all at once. Is that enough to destroy your system? Probably not. But if you have a 100-gallon a day system, or a 200-gallon a day, or a 300-gallon a day system running non-stop until you notice the problem, you could plummet the salinity in your tank. And having a float valve is not a guarantee that something can't go wrong. Float valves can fail. I have had brand new float valves that would just continue to let water get past them and just keep flowing and flowing and flowing. But that's neither here nor there. The other problem is that the more you cycle your RODI system on and off per day, the more quickly you will wipe out your DI resin, and the more quickly you will diminish the value or the lifespan of your membrane. RODI systems are designed to run long and hard and then turn off. So you run it, like 6 hours straight, and you turn it off for a week. That's the proper way to run it. But to run it multiple times a day will wear out the membrane prematurely. And every single time it turns on, that initial water sitting around the membrane is full of TDS, and all that TDS-laden water goes straight into your DI and starts destroying the DI resin prematurely. There was no reason for that to happen. If you're following my video on how to avoid TDS creep, it's like 2-3 minutes long. It's definitely worth a watch if you haven't seen it yet. But if you are running your system for 90 seconds before you let it go to the DI, in other words, run a line before the DI stage into a small container. You'll take out about this much water, which might be about 4 ounces in a drinking glass. And then your TDS is super low again. And then you close that valve and you open up the valve going to the DI. And now your DI resin will last much longer. So in my case, I continue to do that. Even with this setup right now you're looking at, I have a float valve inside my top-off container. But I don't just turn on the system, let it fill. I burn off 90 seconds of water. Now my TDS is nice and low. And if you're wondering how low, it's 1 before it goes to the DI. And then the DI polishes off the 1 TDS. So now it's 0. So I've waited 90 seconds. I've thrown away 4 or 5 ounces of water. And then I go ahead and I close the valve. And now I open the valve going to this container. And it fills up the top of reservoir and fills it up. And it might take 10 hours. I don't care how long it takes. The fact is that I'm not carrying the water across the house and pouring it in is a huge win. Also, you can kind of see the sliding door right above the float valve. That is how I installed the float. I put the door where the float was so I could get my hand in there to screw it on, but then I would close it. And the only other reason to reach in there would be for the dosing pump if you use one. Now, what I did was something entirely different, which you'll be seeing soon with an aqua lifter. Then I put my top-up container under the stand in its official corner. You can see it sitting on some pink foam. There's also some foam where the sump will sit, and that container is all the way up to the metal rail that is the pipe that I slide the walkboard into. I mean, it is so close to it. You can't even get a finger between the metal and the top of the container. It was that tight. And I probably should not have gone that tall. I probably should have come down a little bit more. But I was really thinking I want to make sure that I have as much water for top off as possible, so that way if I have to go on a trip, the tank is taken care of. So there you can see how close it is to the metal rail above it. It's super crazy snug. And in 2015, 2016, when I replaced the sump and the top-off container, the new one is a couple inches lower to where I can literally take it out and clean it if I needed to, or do something with it. This one here, the only way to get this out was to remove the sump, remove the plumbing, remove the manifold. I mean, literally get everything out of the way to get the container slide out from under that rail. So now I can lift it up out of the opening of the steel stand and get it out the back or the front. But yeah, when I put it in there, the first time I was like, wow, this is never coming out. And then I turned on the RO system, and there it is, starting to fill up water. You can see a little bit of a puddle there at the bottom on the lower right. Now, the benefit of the float valve is that once this container is full, it tries to turn off the RODI system. It will not turn it off successfully. So if you're thinking my float turns mine off 100%, you're probably incorrect. So if you are using a float valve right now for something, like you're using in your sump, or using a top-off container, using in a trash can that you mix salt water in, you should look, once the float is up, has the system become silent? Usually if there's a hissing or a crackling sound, there's still water going down the drain line and it hasn't turned off completely. And that's because the float valve has a little rubber flapper in there under that float. And when the float comes up, it pinches the hole shut against this rubber flapper that's, a 1/16 of an inch thick. I mean, it's nothing. And what happens is a little bit of water bleeds past it and a little bit more bleeds past it. And we're talking drops, okay? We're not talking about half a gallon. It's just barely bleeding past that flapper membrane. And so the RO system doesn't turn off entirely. And it just, even though water's not filling the container, overflowing it, your floor's staying dry, but the drain line is still dumping water down the drain nonstop until you turn it off. So use the float to keep your floor dry. But once you see it's full or nearly full, at that point, go over and turn off your RO system so that way there's no water going down the drains. So here's my container filled to the top. And you can see how I started to play with some plumbing ideas on the dart pump. And here's my float all the way up in its fixed position. You can buy float valves that have, and I sell these exact floats, by the way, on Milo's Reef. And these are adjustable. You can either use them through the sidewall of a container or you can use it from the top. Because of that little butterfly nut, you can loosen that and you can adjust what angle you want to run that float. If the float's filling too much, you can adjust it and make the float hang lower. If it's not filling enough, you can adjust to raise it up a little bit. Or like I said, you can orient it into a vertical position as well. So there's lots of flexibility with this exact float valve, and I really like it a lot. Then I mentioned, that I never want anything in the container that can add TDS to pollute the water that is my top off. So at the time, I just had a piece of tubing go all the way to the bottom of my big tall container. And it was some rigid, it was some airline tubing, actually, the rigid airline tubing. And then I connected an aqua lifter, I connected that blue hose to it. And that blue hose then went into the aqua lifter. Then the aqua lifter went out into that other piece of what looks like curved tubing. I was rigging something at the time, and there will be an updated image of this coming up in the next live stream or two, where I show how it all comes together with the sump. But I was using this as a way to dose the water quietly into the sump at a very slow rate. Now, these days, people are using dosing pumps, and the aqua lifter was kind of that. It was a diaphragm pump that cost about $11. It moved 3 gallons per hour. It used 3 watts of electricity. I mean, it was like a no-brainer pump. It was perfect for adding a little top off to your tank as needed. And no matter what system you used, whether you used a mechanical timer or you used float switches, you would just kick this pump on for the duration you needed and then turn it off again, and it added that water that you needed. We don't need top off to go in instantaneously. It doesn't have to go in and add half a gallon in 12 seconds. It can add half a gallon or a quarter gallon or whatever it is in 10 or 15 minutes. That's okay too. It just needs to be adding some water because evaporation has occurred in your total system, and we're trying to replenish what is lost to maintain salinity. But the Aqualifter system, I had that like that for many, many years. All right, let's jump over to the sump. You saw before when I was building it, now it is already built, and I've put it into place. It is sitting on top of that pink foam, and specifically to keep away the temperature of the concrete beneath, so that way the aquarium doesn't have this ongoing chilling situation. You might think, oh, that's a good thing in the summer, but in the winter it's not. So I always put a sheet of foam underneath, which is nice and smooth and level, and that way the sump sits on there and it's got some cushion. There's no high spots, there's no sharp things. It's just the entire base of acrylic is nice and protected. There's a piece of acrylic on the far left that is above the two black strainer baskets. These strainer baskets I talked about last week, they are these huge banjo, that's what I think they're called. I think that's right. Banjo strainers that are going onto the 1.5-inch intake that goes into the pump. And this keeps any kind of livestock from getting sucked in. But why did I make this acrylic carport over it? Well, I was thinking the water level in the sump will be about 8 inches in that zone. These baskets they're like 5-6 inches in diameter. I was thinking there probably will be a problem with it sucking air, that little venturi thing that happens, and suck air into the pump and then push air bubbles into the tank. So I figured if I made these this covered area over it, it would reduce the propensity that the pump might draw in some air. And that did work. But then eventually I found out it wasn't necessary and I was able to remove it. It also gave me a spot to put something down if I wanted to inside the sump. You'll also see the triple baffles. And where the sock is, that is the skimmer section. So you got the skimmer section. The part in the back you can't really see is the refugium. And then the part on the left is the return zone with those two giant strainers going to two external pumps, one being the return pump and one being a manifold pump. And then you can kind of see the top flange that makes up the sump that keeps it nice and strong, because I hate rimless sumps. I like sumps that contain the salt creep and the spatter. And also, let's go to the next picture. I think it'll make more sense. Yeah, they're in the back. I'll go back and forth. In the back there, you'll see a black section. And I'll go to the previous picture. Let's see if can I zoom on this? No, I cannot. It only gets smaller. Oh well. That black part right there is egg crate. So what I did was I owned some black egg crate. I had created that piece of acrylic that is the divider for the refugium zone to the return zone. And I had cut the acrylic to have a lowered area about 1.5 inches tall by probably about 12 inches wide. And what I did was I looked at a piece of egg crate, and I looked at where the squares are to figure out exactly how long that piece would be. And what I did was I cut out that piece that was my little strainer, and I glued it to the top of the acrylic, and that was my teeth. And the reason I did this instead of the normal way of just cutting teeth with acrylic is because I was doing everything by hand back then. I didn't have a CNC machine, and I had the worst time cutting teeth in 3/8 acrylic. Invariably, I'd push in, it would cut, the router would jerk, and the tooth would snap off. And I had to make a whole new piece. And I was sick and tired of throwing away acrylic trying to get one successful run of teeth. And so I just said, okay, I know I can cut teeth in 1/4 inch acrylic, but with 3/8 I can't. So all the sumps that I ever made with 3/8, I used the egg crate system to create a nice barrier between the refugium zone and the return. And it looked clean, it was nice, it was sleek, and it was really easy to glue it in there. And I used the PVC cement to secure the egg crate to the top of the acrylic, and you just glue it on and it stays there forever. You also can see next to the sock is a bubble tower. The bubble tower is where all my drains would go in, and it was to let the water boil and froth and do all that it does, and then the water would then pour out through those teeth at the bottom and into the skimmer section, essentially bubble free. The sock was in case I wanted to run a sock. As you know, as most of you know, I don't use filter socks. I don't like to. But occasionally if there's a need, I thought, okay, I'll do it. And at that time, I asked Vast Marine, can you make me a sock holder? And so they cut something out for me. And then I did my thing and glued it into the sump. And it was nice to not have to do it myself. right here, as I showed you before, where the water can come out. There was also the other thing I want to show you in this photograph was that the baffles are far apart. Sometimes people make the mistake when they're gluing their baffles in their sump. They put them really close together, and so the water going through the baffles and into the next section, it has to travel so rapidly because it's so narrow that if there are bubbles, micro bubbles in the system, they ricochet right into the next zone. So instead of allowing that happen, if you have a wider gap between your baffles, if you can afford it and have the space, you can then let the water migrate quietly through. It stops the bubbles and it goes over the next part bubble free and then pours in the final zone completely perfect, and you just have the ideal setup. And then the additional benefit of having that really nice gap between baffles is you can put the heaters there. And having the heaters between the baffles is twofold. Number one, they're never, ever, ever going to be exposed to air because they're underwater, because the section where the baffles are is always full of water. If you build it the way I build it, and I have the first baffle is to the floor of the sump, the second one is raised up 1.5 inches or 2 inches, then the third one's to the floor of the sump. So that means the baffle zone is full of water, which in this sump here, it probably holds 2 or 3 gallons, that little spot. And that area there is perfect for heaters to stay in forever. You could even put your pH probes and stuff if you wanted, because now the water that's going through your sump has to go through the baffle. So it means it has to pass over the probes. It has to go over the heaters. It is the best way to assure that you are getting the best benefit or the efficiency from your gear, because it's an area of regular, constant, consistent flow. Now, let's switch gears. Let's talk about the return assembly. The return assembly was really important because many tanks, they will drill some holes where you want them, and then you just stick a fitting on the end. But I refused to do that. I said, I want this tank to have no visible plumbing. I don't want to have holes in it. I'll just figure it out. and originally my thought was I would use returns coming up through the overflow box and then run along the full length of the tank and then come down inside the tank. But I didn't like it for 2 reasons. The first reason being is that whole section of pipe coming across the top of the tank, I'd have to lean over it every single time. That pipe would be in my way all the time. Yes, I could put a unit at each end and I could unscrew it and remove it and then work on the tank and then put it back in place and tighten the unions. But I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. I was like, no. And I have worked in tanks like that where they had some permanent plumbing running along the top, and it was just kind of in your way. And, you might grab onto it, you might lean on it, you could damage it in some form or fashion or cause some problems. So I'd rather not have it in the way. The other thing is that big long run of taking the pump and pushing water up through an overflow box, elbow, 7 feet of pipe across, down in the tank was a lot of back pressure, a lot of friction loss, to where you're losing all your gallons per hour because so much pipe is being used. So instead what I chose was I'm going to put the pump at the opposite end, where you saw where the pump was going, and I'm just going to send the water from the pump basically straight up over the edge of the tank and in. But I didn't want to just go up and over and in, because my assembly is the full width of the tank. The tank is 36 inches wide. And if I were to run it up over the top and then put a T and run a line all the way across the other side and put another elbow, what happens is this one is super strong and this one way over here is much weaker. So what you have to do is you have to get the water into the center of the pipe, send it out equally both directions and into the tank. And that was really important. So here's what I'm doing is I'm kind of laying it out, trying to puzzle it together in my head, get a visual representation of how all the pieces will go. What do I need to buy? What am I still missing? And so here we go. First thing I had to do was I had to have a way to keep the assembly on the tank, because there's nothing to grab onto. And as I was putting this presentation together, I was just thinking, man, these days you could 3D print something so much easier than what I built for my tank in 2011. And you could have put it on the end of the pipes, and you could have just had it adjust. You could slide it in, put the assembly in place, and just slide it out and lock it. And that would have been so sweet. But I didn't have that. That was not a thing back then. It feels like 1,000 years ago, right? 2011. So I had these fittings. And I needed a fitting that was hollow on the inside, because I'm going to be cutting it, but it also had to fit inside the pipe. So what I ended up doing was I took a Dremel and I sanded the edge of the part that sticks out. That little bit of a, see how that little top of the white, what is that? That's kind of an internal cap. That part of the top had to come off. It had to be completely smooth top to bottom. And I'm sure someone with a lathe would have had the perfect way to put it onto a lathe and then just buzz that off. I don't have a lathe. I'm not sure how I would connect it to a lathe. I needed this to stay intact, but I did need that little bit off, so I just sanded and sanded it. And once I got it nice and smooth, I was able to press it into the pipe, and that was the goal, to be able to glue it and press it in deeply. This will make more sense in a moment. Then anything that was going to be visible, as I mentioned earlier, I had to paint black, but wherever it was not going to be, wherever it had to be glued, it had to be unpainted. You don't want to, paint a fitting completely and then apply solvents on it and try to erase some of the paint. It's much better to mask off the area that's going to be glued and spray paint the part that's not going to be glued, and then you'll have this good looking product when you're all finished. So what I've done here is I've just laid out again how this is going to go together. I've not glued it yet. I'm just trying to visually double check and make sure that nothing is missing. And I see in this picture, there's my Georgia aquarium coffee mug that I broke years ago. It's been gone. All right. So my fitting that I sanded and dremeled to death to make it fit inside there, I glued it inside, I pressed it all the way in, and then I painted this thing so that way there's no white. Then I very cautiously ran this through my table saw over and over and over to create a 1-inch gap. And once it was completely cut out, there's all that white showing up, and I had to paint it again. And then this is the opposite side. This is the part that's going to glue onto the assembly. Well, I was worried, what if water comes squirting out these ends? The whole point, this is my holder, but it's not a point of water going in the aquarium. So I just loaded up full of silicone, and then I glued it into my my assembly kit. Now, when you're building anything out of PVC, in case you don't know this, sometimes people don't understand this part. So I'm just spelling it out so everyone's included in the conversation, all right? Whenever you have fittings you have to glue together and put into a group on your aquarium, if you got a T and an elbow and a this and a that, sometimes you're going to need to cut short pieces of PVC pipe that you're going to then put between two fittings to create this design that you've come up in your head. Now, my situation here, what you're looking at is different size plumbing. So we've got 1.5 inch pipe at the top that is going into an 1.5 inch T. But then what's going out of the T is 1 inch that goes out left and right, goes down into a T that goes straight down into 1 inch, and then elbows and out. I think that was probably 3/4 inch penductors. I don't think those were 1 inch penductors, but it's either 3/4 inch or 1 inch. But what I was trying to do was keep the pipe as big as possible from the pump all the way up to the top of the tank and into the point where it had to go out left and right, and then I reduced. And the longer you can have maximum water volume, the better. It might look cleaner to have smaller pipe up at the top, but you're going to restrict the flow because the pipe is so much smaller. So I always try to maximize as much as possible. So now I'm going to give you some close-ups, but here you can see the assembly is in the tank where it needs to be, and it is holding on to the Eurobrace. Nothing else is holding it up. So I know that one's kind of hard to see because of the reflection. Also, my penductors had to be at least 3 inches under the surface of the water. If they're any closer to the surface, they would geyser in air and they would pump out water and air bubbles. And you don't want to see that. So penductors have to be low. And this is the same principle with random flow generators, which are the newer version of penductors that have that nice change of flow where they go all different directions, completely randomly. It's really nice, and that's what I use in my tank now. So the assembly is there, spanned between the two Eurobracing, and you can see the plumbing is 1.5 inches coming up on the left, going straight across, and then going down in the middle of the aquarium, and then goes left and right. I just want to emphasize that over and over so you don't miss the point. Also, you'll see there's a big, huge gray union on the left. That was so if I need to disassemble this thing or remove it or clean it or soak it in vinegar and water, I had a point where I could disconnect the plumbing easily. Just loosen the union, slide the assembly off the glass bracing, take it outside, put in a trash can full of solvent, like pump clean or citric acid or vinegar and water or muriatic acid and water, soak everything, get it nice and clean, and get the coralline off, get the vermicids off, get the aptasia off, scrub it, put it back in the tank, nice and clean again. So look at my fitting that I had to fabricate with my table saw, some silicone and a weird white cap. That ended up working out perfectly, and it never budged. I mean, if I wanted to wiggle it, I could, but it kept the plumbing. Not only did it keep the plumbing at the right height, but it also kept the plumbing from tapering down or tilting up, because it's just PVC pipe, right? And and it was really important that I glue everything straight and square, so that as I'm putting that last fitting in, I'm adjusting how I'm going to do the elbow going over. I had to make sure it's all true and straight up and down, because I didn't want those elbows inside the tank to lean down and shoot water this way. So those pieces in the end were really important, and it worked out really, really well. And then you can see the penductors are in the tank at the right depth, and you can see lots of other fittings. Yeah, so these were definitely 3/4, because remember I told you my pipes coming into the aquarium are 1 inch, and then that elbow I can see right there, there is a 1 inch to 3/4 inch adapter, and then there's the threaded knuckle for the lock line. There's a lock line knuckle 1, knuckle number 2, and then the penductor itself. And so that was a 3/4 inch assembly. Today, these days, I've been using the random flow generator, and I'm using 1 inch. So I've removed one more reduction. My water comes up 1.5 inches, reduces down to 1 inch when it has to, and then 1 inch out the penductor. Then, let's talk about the return pump, the thing that's pushing the water up in the first place. So from my notes, it turns out this one I won in a raffle. I don't even remember that. I remember buying lots of Dart pumps, but apparently I got one for free once. How nice is that? Well, free. I bought raffle tickets. So I needed to connect this pump to my plumbing, and this pump is still on the market. So I mean, this is still not time sensitive. This still works in this day and age. Is what I'm trying to say. The pump itself on the front is 2 inches. That's a 2-inch inner diameter hole, but the hole coming out is 1.5 inches. And I was kind of confused. Why is it so big going in, but only 1.5 inch going out? So I contacted them and said, what's going on? And they said, you can reduce that 2 inch down to 1.5 inches if you want on the intake. As long as the intake and the output are the same size, it's fine. If you want to go larger in the intake so it doesn't struggle to suck in water, that's even better. I was like, all right, fair enough, got it. So I've got my Dart pump here, and I am going to reduce it down to 1.5 inches because that was my master plan. So I got this adapter, or I think it's called a step down, and I masked it off. I painted it for the part that was going to show, the part that was going to be threaded into the pump itself. I went ahead and, after it was dry and no more, the paint was dry, at that point I would put some Teflon tape on there, and then I put some Teflon paste on there, and then I screw it in by hand. And I screw it in as hard as I can with my hand. You really want to avoid using wrenches at this case, because it is plausible as you're wrenching in a fitting, because you don't want it to drip. As you do that, you could actually crack that impeller housing. And even though that looks like a really rugged piece of plastic, you'd be surprised what happens when you're threading something in and you're tightening it with a wrench, and you just split it. And then all of a sudden, you've got to get a whole new cover for the front of your pump. So we want to go in as tight as you can go by hand, so it doesn't leak. If you need to give it a slight nudge more with a wrench, just enough to stop a weird pinhole drip, that's okay. But don't just go hog wild on it, is all I'm going to say. Then I got some 6-inch, what's called PVC nipple. So this was a solid piece of pipe with threads on each end. And I needed pieces of pipe that one side was smooth and one side was threaded. So the simplest solution, the cheapest solution, was to buy a threaded pipe, cut it in half, and create these 2 nipples. And what that allowed me to do was to thread in my nipple into the reducer that goes into the Dart pump. And then on the end of the smooth side, I can slip on a union for easy disconnect. And you can see on the outgo, the part that's going straight up, that's where I threaded in another nipple, and then it goes up into a double union ball valve. So there's the union, and you can see how the nipple part, the threaded part that would go into a pump, is it's ready, the threads match, and then the other part is smooth, slides into a smooth fitting. It's just one of those things you need to know. If you're going to be using threaded unions, this becomes a little more complicated. I find that it's so much easier to use slip unions because you can always press the pipe in and glue it on, and that's it. And then you unscrew it at that big nut to remove it at the union itself instead of ever having to touch the hard PVC pipe. I hope that came across in a logical, cohesive way. So now you can see my dart pump has a union on the intake side, and it has a double union ball valve on the output, which has that orange handle to like close the line. And people did ask me back then, well, why didn't you just put a double union ball valve on the front and on the top? And I said, because of money. Because those valves were about $35, $37 a piece, and I had 2 of these pumps. So that means I'd have to spend another $70 to have a ball valve handle on the intake of the pump, and on the 2 pumps. And I just didn't see the critical need to have a handle there, because, and I'll show you here in another picture why. So here we are. We've got the pump in place. You can see the reducer going into the pump. You can see the threaded nipple. You can see the union, and then you see a short piece of the black spa flex, and then it goes into the bulkhead, which is on the side of the sump. And then in the far right, under the little carport thing I made, you can see the strainer basket that's going to keep everything from getting sucked into this pump accidentally. Now, why did I put this little piece of Spaflex in there? It was for vibration dampening, because it's soft and bendy. And I thought if this pump has any kind of vibration situation at all, that little piece, that little 6-inch section of pipe will reduce any kind of resonance happening to the sump. And I tend to do this with external pumps. Now, if I needed to remove this pump, like let's say it's leaking, it needs something rebuilt, it needs to be replaced, I don't have that valve with a handle on it to close the line, so how am I going to keep the water from draining out? Well, the easy solution was the cheapest solution, and that's to unscrew that basket inside the sump, which is 1.5 inches, and then screw in an 1.5 inch plug that costs $1. And so I had this little 1-inch cap, or I'm sorry, 1.5 inch cap, that just sat next to the sump the entire duration of the tank running. And if there was ever a time when I needed to work on a pump and remove it, I would remove the strainer basket, screw in my little plug, and then I could now remove the plumbing, and I'd only have a little bit of water inside the pipe, which the pond liner would catch and send it down into the floor drain, or I could throw a towel there and absorb it very quickly. But it was simpler. It took up less space. The double union ball valve would have taken up more space in that area. I might not have had room for the flexible Spaflex. So this seemed to be the best scenario for me for the 2 pumps. And you see the one pump in the background right there. There's another one in the foreground that's out of the shot. And both of these pumps were also sitting up on a piece of that pink foam. I just measured, the size of the footprint of the pump itself where it had feet, and I created a piece of foam, put it there, and that lifted the pump up another 3/4 of an inch. Again, if water was to get into that liner and start filling up rapidly, I wanted to make sure that the mechanical part of that pump, the electrical part, was way above the water line and could never get flooded and short out. So I've explained all that. And then the assembly going up, you can see I've got the double union ball valve coming off the pump. Then it goes up into a T, and you're probably thinking, why? Well, I'll explain that later. And then it continues into a 45, and then it goes into Spaflex, and the Spaflex goes straight up the tank. And see, you can see I've got a nice straight run that goes, diagonally, I should say, that goes into another 45, and then it goes straight up along the wall and up over the top of the tank, and then goes into the return assembly. And that is our last picture for today. So I hope that you guys enjoyed that one. I decided to stop there. How are we doing on time? No, pretty good. I decided to stop there because there was a lot in the next section, and I thought I really don't want to get too bogged down with this. So next live stream, next week, we will be going into the manifold assembly. We will be going into the drain assembly. We're going to talk about reactors and stuff. I mean, there's a lot. So, and we might even be going to the point where, oh yeah, water's in the tank. So we did it. And basically, and we'll see if there's something more to share. Because there was quite a bit going on back then. But this might end up being 8-part or possibly 10-part total. That's my guess. But I hope you enjoyed that, So let me see if you have any questions. Let me see if I can answer anything. I'll keep this open in case I need to put something back on screen, in case you have some questions. But this is the part of the show when you get to ask saltwater questions, and I do my best to answer you, and then we go about our day. Let's see. Trevor Hiller says, if you have an auto-flushing valve installed on the RODI system, does that prevent the problem of TDS creep? I have one that flushes for 20 seconds at startup, then once per hour. I think that would work. There's something that I'm kind of playing with doing one day. I don't have that valve. I know which one you're talking about. I believe BRS sells it. And I was kind of, if we're talking about the exact same product, I kind of had it made one of my eyes twitch when I saw it, because it said it's just going to flush once every hour forever. Like, there's not like when you need it to flush. It's just going to keep doing it on some kind of internal schedule. That was kind of weird to me. But if you can, I think what needs to happen, someone with multiple TDS meters needs to put it on everything. You've got it on the in, you've got it on the outbound of the membrane. If you have two membranes after the other membrane, if you have one membrane going to the next membrane between the two membranes, if you have one, you should have one on the waistline, and then we can literally watch all the numbers and we can see what each step of the way is doing, because it's kind of interesting stuff. Recently there was a conversation I was in, and they were saying, why on earth would you run the first membrane waste into the second membrane? Because that is the dirty water. So you're sending that dirty water into another membrane? That's crazy. I said, no, that's actually industry standard. That's very normal. The first membrane is doing the bulk of the work. It's getting out the best water it can. And then the waste is waste. But the principle of running the waste into a second membrane is to get a little more water out of that wastewater. And so, yeah, it's going to wipe out the second membrane more rapidly. It's because it's getting beat up to death because of the higher TDS. That's what I was saying. If we were to put meters in all these different places, we could actually see those numbers and see what we're actually doing. And then you'd know what the true total dissolved solids is of the absolute waste after a secondary membrane, because it should be even more dense, right? So it's kind of an interesting experiment to do. And I might do it at one point. Why not? But I myself personally, speaking of RO systems, mine has been leaking, which is ironic because I build them for a living, right? And I went in there and I was like, okay, that's weird. So it looked like it was the middle housing. So I took off the housing, I looked at the O-ring, it was kind of flat. I was like, all right. So I got a brand new O-ring and I put the silicone grease on it and I put it in there, I put it on, and I screwed it on, I turned it on, thought it was good, and it was leaking. I was like, ah. So I'm staring at it even harder, that thing where you look really, really close. And I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And you can see the housings under the metal bracket, and I'm looking between the housings at the back, and I see water dripping off the metal. I'm like, okay, that means there's water on top. So the water's leaking from like the membrane area, or the auto shut-off valve, or the booster pump, or the waistline, or the pressure switch. So I'm studying all these different things trying to find the leak. And I can't find it. I replaced one thing. I trimmed off a piece of tubing, put in a new connection. I did something else. I literally went one by one. And it was still leaking. I was like, this is impossible. Now, it's in the back of my utility area, above the dryer, in the corner, on the wall. And, there's a dryer in my way. I can't just, walk up to it and get on it, Which means I have to remove it from the wall and bring it to me. So last night I did that. I took it off the wall. I put a big towel down on top of the dryer so I don't scratch it, and I put this thing on there, and I'm looking at everything on the top, and I'm like, nothing is leaking on top. The booster pump has not blown a gasket. The auto shut-off valve has not sprung a leak. I mean, nothing. So I turn it on again, and I can see the water. It's just like migrating across the metal and going down. Like, that is so nuts. I believe, which kind of sucks, but I believe the middle housing, the white cap that the housing screws onto, I think it has sprung a leak on the top near one of those 4 screws that holds it all together. That's my guess. Which means I have to completely take it apart. All the way down, from the top down, take all of it apart to get to that one spot. Because that's kind of like the middle, that's like where it all starts. So I'm going to have to do that today because I need to be able to use my system. Because not only does it take care of my aquarium, it also makes my drinking water, my coffee water, my cooking water. I mean, it makes my ice cubes for the fridge. So, that thing, it's very beneficial to my household, and I need it operating properly. And, I don't know how old the system is, and I'm halfway tempted to just build a brand new one, take this one, throw it in the trash, and put it up. But I mean, I literally just replaced the membrane and the filters about 3 weeks ago. So all the internals are still good. So I am going to see what's going on if I can replace that one piece. But if I can't, I might just go ahead and build myself a new one and give myself a 1-year warranty because that's how I roll. Trevor says, I seem to have 0 TDS even on startup, and my DI resin lasts about 1.5 years. That's a long time. That's great. I don't get that, but then I make a lot of water, and maybe you're not making as much as I do. I'm going to throw this on the screen again because I need to. Where did it go? Boom. Reminder, get a subscription to Coral. I want Matt to say, Mark, what did you do today on your live stream? Because all these people are subscribing. You go to coralmagazine.com/Milev23. You don't have to do that. You can just go coralmagazine.com. But if you do Milev23, then he knows that you did it through my channel. I don't make any more money. I get my same Coral paycheck. I'm just letting you, it's not an affiliate thing, I promise. It's just a way to track what's going on. Mirror Reef says, when is your new tank coming? I don't have a new tank coming. Aquaball said, I just replaced a smaller sump to a bigger one. I didn't know anything about sumps before. I thought they all do the same thing, but I was dead wrong. Yeah. It's a whole science to it. Melvin says, I came across the Reef Addicts podcast. Great fun to listen to. It's a bit reefy-fish. Yeah, he says, chaotic in a good way. You should invite her to your live stream sometime. We had a lot of fun doing those podcasts. We also had Reefcast before that, which was a lot of fun as well. Aquaball says, I just set up 120 gallons. After a month, I turned on the lights, so the ugly stage is here. And I added some snails, about 7. And they're working hard, but after the ugly stage is gone, are the snails going to starve to death? Well, actually, you don't have nearly enough snails unless these are huge Mexican turbo snails. For a 120-gallon tank, I would be recommending... I know it's a month old, okay, so it's early. But typically, I recommend 1 critter per gallon. So 7 snails are going to be... It's going to be hard for them to keep up with all of the ugly stage. There's just not enough mouths mowing it down. I mean, I would probably triple that number for now. And then, the ugly stage can't be completely avoided, but you can control it. So having enough mouths in there. Now you asked, will they starve to death? No, because algae is constantly growing. Every time you turn on the lights, a little bit more algae, new algae is growing. As you add fish, there's new fish poop in the tank. As you add corals, there's going to be waste from that. The snails are constantly looking for food and finding it. So they're not going to starve to death. And if you, for some reason, feel like there's just not enough food in the tank, if you're just like, my tank is sterile, Mark doesn't know what he's talking about, you can gather all your snails together into one spot and you can put some pellet food down there. You could tie a piece of nori onto a rock with a rubber band and put the snails near it and let them go snack on nori right now to kind of beef up. But we really don't want to get in the habit of feeding the cleanup crew because we want them to eat the algae. If they get hooked on Rod's food or Larry's Reef Frenzy or whatever it is you use, they might not eat the algae because they only want the good stuff. And we want them to eat the ugly stuff. Triggerfish says, when are you bringing Chris Meckley out to get your caulk dosing system started? That's hilarious. Never. No, it's not going to happen. I will have Chris on soon, though. We have a good topic planned. I think I want to do it when we're done with this series. I don't want to interrupt the series with a one-off topic. I think this is more. I think we should just go consistent. And I probably should make this a playlist just because it's a good thing to follow. Okay. Michael says, will it hurt an acrylic tank to sit outside in the cold weather? No, I mean, it depends what you mean by cold. I mean, obviously freezing weather is not great. Getting covered in ice and snow is not great. Not sitting in the sun is not great. These are all things we want to avoid. You know, we want to protect the aquarium if you can. If you can wrap it up in blankets and then a tarp, that would probably be smart. You know, say if it has to sit outside. But just the temperature itself is not going to like suddenly alter the molecules of the acrylic. No, it'll be okay. But you know, when you bring it inside, you need to leave it alone for a while and let it adjust to normal room temperature again for the expansion and swelling and retraction and the losing the moisture content that it absorbed from being outside. And then after it's had, you know, a few days to kind of equalize, then you could go ahead and inspect it, make sure it's safe to use, and start adding water and, you know, build up the system. Any other questions? Look at that. We're already done. That was so fast. I'm going to switch from this one to my income. So if you do want to buy things from Mila's Reef, please go to shop.milasreef.com because that is where you're going to find the products. And since Coral Magazine is wrapping up here in the next 48 hours or so, I am going to obviously have a big sleep. And then after that, I'm going to hit the ground running and take care of Mila's Reef customers as well because I have things I need to build and get orders out the door. We are coming up on the holidays, and I've got other things I want to do as well during this downtime between issues. Coral Magazine comes out every 2 months, so I don't have to like work solid 2 months and then print, and then 2 months I get to have a little bit of time off to kind of, you know, relax and recuperate. I'm telling you, the research involved in making sure each magazine right, it's a lot of effort. Also, I want to thank Fritz for being a sponsor of this channel. They were on the presentation section, but I didn't mention it till now. So if you're a listener, Fritz sponsors this channel because they like what I teach. And so they've supported me throughout this year, and I really appreciate it. Triggerfish suggests then I should have Chris Meckley on for a late night Wednesday chat. You know, I actually had talked with Chris's wife today, who was up late last night, who actually texted me at like 1 in the morning, but my phone was like, you're supposed to be sleeping, so you won't get any of your texts. And she was up late because they had corals spawning in their aqua facility, you know, in their aquaculture facility. And so they were, you know, observing what was happening and probably taking pictures of what's going on. It's really cool. So, yeah, no one's getting any sleep lately. It's been rough on all of us. All right, Zen Ginger, you can rewatch later and see, so that way you don't miss any of the good parts. I do take the time to get all these pictures together for you, so that way you have a nice presentation to follow along in. All right. Let's see. Baker's Reef says, I recently started a new tank with Fritz Turbo Start, and I have a bottle left over. Would it benefit a well-established tank's biodiversity to add it? I think you can. I believe you can, but I'm not 100% certain. So I'm going to have to defer to them. You could reach out to Sean or to Evie or to, who else do I know that works there? Jacob Blankenship. I mean, all these people are on Facebook. And you can reach out to them, or you can contact Fritz Aquatics directly and call their phone number and find out from them. But I think you can. All right, let's go to this because I see no more questions. So I just want to remind you, today is Water Test Saturday. That is, every Saturday is Water Test Saturday. And you don't get the day off. You need to test your water. You need to see what your parameters are. If you want, you can do a water change today too. It's another good thing. You could test your water before the water change and then test again after to see if everything's still the same. I mean, you can't test too much, right? But I do want you to test the minimum amount, and that is weekly. So if you will just consistently stay on top of this, you will be able to avoid things like phosphates getting way out of control or salinity going way off. You know, because these are things that happen over time. And when you are not testing regularly, then the problem just exacerbates more and more over time. It just gets worse and worse and worse. And finally you get at your test kit, like, holy moly, how on earth did this get so bad? Well, if you looked at the last 8 weeks of testing that you didn't do, you would have known much sooner. So it's really important for the livestock, for the life of your animals, that you have really good water quality on a regular basis. And by doing that testing, you are maintaining stability of the ecosystem, which is the most important part. Hillbilly Reefer says, any more thoughts on tank trimming? Yeah, I'm still working on trimming out things out of the tank. I haven't had any time lately, but that's all part of next week and the week after. I will be working on my tanks, and I gotta get stuff done. I gotta get projects completed. I've got a deck to build. I got a lot of things to do, but all good things happen when time allows. Let's see. There's one note here that I didn't share, and it's a little bit late. I should have said it sooner. But when it comes to plumbing, the principle is simple. Water drains into the sump. Water goes back up to the display tank. Avoid too many turns and fittings and keep it looking clean. That's it. So if you can apply that principle when you're setting up your own plumbing for your tank, you'll be successful. The more you complicate it, when you want to do this, I've seen people where they take their plumbing and they go up from the sump, to the wall, up the wall, turn the corner, go around the corner, go up the wall, go across over here, go up to here. It's like, wow, that's so many fittings. And every single one of those fittings is knocking off a percentage of the flow. And especially when the pipes are small. Because, you would think, well, the pump is 1 inch, so I'm going to do 1 inch plumbing all the way up, and I'm going to zigzag it through this really crazy assembly. And it's an awful restriction. So it would be much better to go 1.5 inches if you have to use those restrictions. So that way the pipe is more wide open to let water flow through it easily. And the pump should be able to keep up with that perfectly. But the less fittings, the better. And if you can use Spaflex instead of rigid PVC, where you can do the bendy thing and get around and all the way up, you've taken out like 7 fittings right there with one bendy pipe. So something to keep in mind. All right. There's one more here, I think. Reef Keeper says he checked my algae ID section. I do have Olive on there, don't I? He says tangs and herbivores don't work due to the size. What cleanup crew, if any, works for Ulva? I'm not positive, but you could probably ask in Club Mila's Reef and see if someone has an answer there. If not, Tia Davis might have an answer for you. She was one of our Markness speakers, and she was our macroalgae person. If not her, you may be, this is the wrong guy to ask, but Dennis, who goes by Taiga Boy, he loves macroalgae, and he wants to keep it alive. So he might be the wrong person to ask what eats it, but maybe he knows. Maybe he knows what absolutely never to put in his aquarium because he doesn't want it to be decimated. And he could say, oh yeah, I found out that bumblebee snails want it or something. So there's a few names that I can point you to that might know. You could always ask Richard Ross too. Maybe he would know because he talks about cleanup crews often. I'm going to wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in this weekend. I will see you again in a week. And I hope that your tanks continue to do well. And please post some pictures in Club Mila's Reef. I want to see them. I haven't seen your aquariums in a while. So, bye.